Good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday, August the 20th. You've got ag markets this morning. Let's call them flat, just kind of chopping around. We're still, like everyone else, digesting what we're seeing from the pro farmer tour. And I think, Dan, what you'll touch on this morning is not a lot of compelling evidence to support revisions from the USDA in September. We've also got kind of in the background and things that we think maybe the market is not fully pricing in. It's still geopolitical risk, increasing tensions with China, and some very practical things that we think could harm trade. And trade, I think, is what we're missing. The wheat market seems to clearly be telling us something. And as do the corn and soybean markets kind of join that party in the next 30 days is the big question for us. So managing risk, top of mind. But Dan, go ahead and break down what you're seeing in the details this morning.
Good comments, Ben, and I believe you're right. It is trade that's lacking. Let's start out here a little bit on Pro Farmer. They came out with some very strong ear counts, remembering back to our survey of late last week, the Ag Resource Survey. And we only did Iowa and Illinois because we think those are the two most important states. But when you look at that corn yield in Nebraska, 179.5, and compare it to NAS and you model it out, there's still room for a couple of bushels relatively for that to go up. So the Pro Farmer found a very record large and very big corn crop in Nebraska. Indiana confirmed the USDA number. I have no problem with Indiana's 205 or 20 somewhere in that vicinity in terms of yield. The Pro Farmer yield came out at 193.8. Again, both in Nebraska and Indiana, we add yield to try to get to the NAS final. Pod counts record large or second largest on record for both states. Again, very strong. I would imagine that as you move the tour today into Illinois and Iowa, two states we saw late last week, they are going to find record ear counts, strong yield potential, very high pod counts. They're not going to be counting the number of number 3 pods, but as you remember, Ben, we found record numbers of 3 bean pods last week, and even some 4 bean pods, which are just something you don't see all the time. So again, a big crop keeps getting bigger is the mantra, and we believe that will be the case again as we get Pro Farmer into Illinois, Iowa, and then they finish up the tour tomorrow in Rochester, and I'll be speaking at that, so hope to see you there. As you look at the other news in the markets here this morning, it's all about China. The ASA, or American Soybean Association, is out telling the Trump administration that it's kind of a dire straits for U.S. soybean farmers unless we see some Chinese demand here very quickly. As you know, in this call, we've been talking about China going backwards to early July, in terms of their absence in the U.S. soybean market. I don't see any change in that. I don't think the U.S. and China can do a one-off deal, if you will, that they'll come buying U.S. soybeans. And then we have Secretary Basenta saying overnight that, he believes that the U.S.-China trade negotiations or the current deal is very good. He likes where tariff levels are at. We're bringing record revenue into the United States because of Chinese tariffs. But remember, the Chinese have a 23% tariff on U.S. soybeans. So with that tariff, they're not buying U.S. beans. They're going to be buying South American, whether it's for political purposes or because of economics. In either case, we still believe the Brazilians have another, let's call it 8 to 10 million tons of soybeans to sell someone. I think China's on the top of that list. As you think what this may mean to U.S. shipments, we've got a little history that we can go back and look upon. When we go back to the 2018-19 trade war, you can see how Chinese demand really suffered. And so we still believe U.S. shipments will be, we'll still see other countries like the EU and Southeast Asia be buyers of U.S. soybeans. We're not going to miss them. They may even be bigger buyers because of the premiums down in Brazil. But that being said, I think if you take China out for October, let's say the Chinese were going to import 7 or 8 million tons of U.S. beans, which was where we were in our grids. That means that maybe U.S. soybean exports are down to 3 to 3.5 million for all other sources. So for us, the United States, to export 100 to 125 million bushels of soybeans in October is not a bullish driver. And that will be very concerning as we bring this crop home and try to find space to put it. The other factor which the United States geopolitically is doing is still kind of poking the bear. So they're still targeting steel, copper, lithium, other imports on China due to the Uyghurs, which of course are still having labor law issues. This is not new. This has been going on for over a decade. But nonetheless, the United States, just in the last 24 hours, decided to, of course, point them out and put additionality in terms of restrictions on those industries within China. China is going to be angered by all of this. They will not like it. So this, again, is another stake that's driven between the two parties. But it doesn't really end there. You know, as you think forward and you start thinking about what's going to be happening in October, I would remind everyone that bulk grain cargoes are exempt. But it is an irritant to the Chinese that any Chinese vessel after October 14th coming into a U.S. port will be subject to a $50 fee. That, of course, is on a 5-time basis. But again, this is for container ships. This would be anything that's owned and utilized by the Chinese. If it's built in China, there's also a tax that's coming in. So this is a direct shot at the Chinese shipping industry. And again, it's going to be problematic, if you will, for U.S. trade because we still have soybean meal, DDGs, soybeans, corn, and wheat that's shipped on containers. All of that will be subject to this $50 a metric ton and ship that demand elsewhere. So I did want to remind people we're about 6 weeks away before this next tax level it kicks in. And this is for all countries or, you know, when we bring Chinese vessels in, this is the application that will be applied. So as you look at what we're losing to China, this is a graphic showing you U.S. soybean exports to China on a monthly seasonal. You know, we're going to miss September. It's already the last 10 days of August. China can't buy and load and get vessels in place in the next 3 or 4 weeks. So you can kind of take September off the table. We also believe China's bought somewhere around 6.5 to 7 million tons of Brazilian and South American beans. So I don't think there's a need for the U.S. in October. This really gets us to November. And if we don't get a deal in the next month or so, I think there's a real risk that we could lose November demand. All told, I think as you look at this, you know, September, October amounts to about 10 million tons. If we take it to November, it could be 15 to 18 million tons. This is the risk. You know, we're talking, 300 million bushels of U.S. soybeans. This is far more important in terms of demand than any kind of crop estimate that we can come out with. We know we got a big crop. We'll see how it all finishes. But boy, we need that Chinese demand nearby. If they're going to buy only South American beans, it does become a problem down the road. Lastly, the world trade issues are really not only domiciled to maybe the soybeans in China and the United States. We also have problems in terms of world wheat demand. When you look at the Black Sea, world wheat demand is down some little over 3 million tons. We're only the second month in the crop here. This is EU wheat exports. See where they compare to last year. It does not include the French data. I think French exports have been a little larger, but nonetheless, you get the picture in that outside of Mexico buying U.S. corn and soybeans, the outlook is rather dismal, if you will, in terms of world trade. World trade for corn, soybeans, and wheat is all down year on year in their respective crop years. And it kind of tells us that the market's going to struggle on rallies. No one wants to chase a rally as it sits today. So the Pro Farmer Tour will talk a lot about how crops come home. And so I do believe we need 1 or 2 finishing rains yet. But as you look at temperatures over the next 10 to 14 days, they are going to be cooler than normal across the Midwest. This will help disease pressures. This will also help, of course, corn and soybeans fill kernels or pods. And so we're optimistic. The chart on your right reflects soil moisture in the top 16 inches of the soil. Notice that the most dryness is really centered on Nebraska, Kansas, areas that got rain here recently. We also had some rain in northern Indiana and Michigan. The rest of the United States is really looking at moisture that is average or slightly above average. And so I think that's going to help these crops come home, even though we don't have a lot of rainfall in the forecast. Crops can utilize what's in the soil, and I think that's important to understand, Ben. So, it's hard to see the markets, at least today, sustaining something to the upside unless we get something out of the Trump administration regarding a trade deal with China, which seems unlikely, or something that we can't foresee today, a black swan per se, Ben. But other than that, we're looking at big crops that need storage. We're heading into first notice day next week, and I imagine the markets will struggle on rallies and will probably still push lower into the end of the month.
Yeah, that's something we've seen, especially in corn and wheat. You've got this phenomenon where you kind of recover up to chart resistance, then the rally fails, and then you kind of work back lower because we don't really see anything to change that, at least in the short or medium terms. And I'd say point out too, one, we're going to get into the details of wheat trade tonight. So of course, $1 is all it takes to get you in there. Secondly, thinking about soybean demand, we're looking at some weekly climate forecasts that are kind of turning wetter in Brazil. So planting dates, will they be normal? I think that's next on the horizon. So a lot of things at the market today. None of it looks terribly positive, beyond some short covering. And so kind of status quo from our end. As usual, all the best. We will see everyone tomorrow.